The story usually ends with a motorcycle laid out on Compton pavement, machines humming in a hospital room, and doctors speaking softly like the outcome already settled. Folks around Wilmington and Rosecrans did not understand how someone who survived street wars reached that ending sideways. Nearly everybody tied to her records was already gone, buried, locked up, or erased from everyday talk. People whispered her name without saying it directly, since her reputation carried weight long after the studio lights went dark. That ending makes sense only after rewinding through places, moves, and decisions that never looked dangerous at first glance. Before California ever entered the picture, Rajny Fox grew up in Steubenville, Ohio, a steel town where daily routines followed factory whistles instead of territorial lines or color-coded boundaries. She was born on July 21st, 1970, raised in neighborhoods where kids worried about school schedules and weekend plans rather than which blocks belonged to which crews. Steubenville, in the mid-'80s, did not train people to read street politics quickly, since most disputes stayed personal and rarely escalated beyond familiar faces. Folks who later talked about her childhood described her as quiet, observant, and cautious, someone who listened longer than she spoke while absorbing what surrounded her. Her teenage years stayed grounded in predictability, with school mornings, family expectations, and social circles that never demanded constant vigilance. Violence existed in the abstract, something seen on television rather than experienced firsthand, which shaped how she interpreted risk and safety early on. Nothing in Steubenville prepared her for environments where presence alone could be questioned, judged, or challenged without warning. That lack of street conditioning mattered later, since it forced her to learn everything through direct exposure rather than inherited neighborhood wisdom. People who relocate later in life often underestimate how deeply geography rewires instincts, especially when survival rules change overnight. The move west happened during the late '80s, when her family relocated from Ohio to Compton, California, placing her inside one of the most volatile urban zones in America. Compton at that time lived under constant tension between Blood and Crip factions, with lines drawn block by block and enforced through reputation rather than signage. Streets carried histories that newcomers rarely understood, and asking questions often marked someone as vulnerable. Rajny arrived without street credentials, local alliances, or any understanding of which colors mattered, which gestures offended, or which corners required caution. Adjustment did not come gradually, since Compton demanded immediate awareness from anyone walking through its neighborhoods. Daily routines shifted fast, with simple errands requiring situational awareness, unfamiliar to someone raised in Ohio's calmer environment. Schools reflected the same pressures as students navigated unspoken hierarchies tied to family names, addresses, and affiliations rather than grades alone. For a young woman especially, relocation introduced layered vulnerability, since safety depended on both visibility and association. The city did not offer orientation sessions or grace periods, forcing adaptation through observation and trial rather than instruction. Rajny learned quickly that neutrality rarely existed, since people read silence as either weakness or secrecy. Remaining unaffiliated drew attention from multiple directions, creating pressure to align or disappear socially. That environment began shaping her instincts, pushing her away from Midwestern reserve toward calculated self-presentation. This period mattered because it marked the first time her identity responded directly to external threats instead of internal preference. Compton did not change her overnight, yet the city planted conditions that demanded evolution. Survival became less about comfort and more about reading situations correctly. That shift set the stage for choices that followed when protection gradually blurred into belonging. Rajny's entry into Piru culture did not follow the dramatic recruitment myths people imagine when discussing gang affiliation. Proximity played the largest role, since the neighborhoods she moved through daily placed her near-blood territories tied to Avenue Peru and surrounding sets. Protection emerged as a practical concern rather than ideological commitment, especially for someone navigating unfamiliar streets without family roots in Compton. Over time, repeated exposure built familiarity, and familiarity slowly transformed into alignment. Street rumors later circulated, claiming a traumatic assault occurred around her arrival period, an allegation referenced by producers like DJ Battlecat without concrete documentation. Those stories remain unverified, yet their persistence highlights how gang environments assign meaning to turning points regardless of factual clarity. Such narratives gain traction since trauma often explains abrupt behavioral shifts better than coincidence alone. Whether accurate or not, the rumor reflects how people contextualized her transformation within a violent landscape. What remains verifiable is her eventual identification with Piru sets, particularly Avenue Piru, which originated in Inglewood and extended influence beyond Compton. Affiliating provided immediate social insulation, since recognized association reduced harassment from rival factions. Rajny adopted the name Bloody Mary deliberately, selecting an alias that carried menace, memorability, and permanence rather than playful branding. Names matter in street culture, functioning as both shield and warning, and she chose one that communicated seriousness instantly. Acceptance among male gang members did not come from isolated acts of aggression, but from consistency and presence over time. She showed up, stayed visible, followed codes, and avoided behaviors that drew unnecessary attention. That reliability mattered more than bravado, earning respect gradually instead of through spectacle. People who later spoke about her emphasized discipline, noting how she handled herself with restraint rather than recklessness. Conflicting accounts exist regarding her exact Piru affiliation, with some sources claiming Luda's Park Peru rather than Avenue Peru as her primary base. Such disputes are common in oral street histories, where memory, loyalty, and perspective shape recollection. Regardless of precise labeling, her standing across Piru neighborhoods remained strong, allowing movement between areas without constant challenge. That mobility signaled recognition beyond a single block. As time passed, her reputation extended outward, reaching people who had never met her directly. Stories circulated about her seriousness, her composure, and her refusal to play roles assigned to women in male-dominated spaces. She did not posture loudly, which paradoxically amplified her mystique. Silence often carries more weight than constant talk in environments where credibility determines safety. By the early 90s, her name traveled faster than her voice, reaching studios before she ever touched a microphone. People already associated her with authenticity rooted in lived experience rather than performance. That groundwork mattered later when music entered the picture, since credibility preceded artistry. Her identity solidified first on the streets, setting conditions that shaped everything recorded afterward. Rap did not find Rajny Fox through auditions, talent searches, or industry introductions, since the first bridge came through shared environments where music and street life overlapped naturally. Tweety Bird Locke, a Kelly Park Crip already known locally for raw diss records, noticed her presence during regular hangouts where gang members, hustlers, and studio hopefuls crossed paths. He saw how people treated her differently, speaking carefully around her name, which mattered more than lyrical ability at that stage. Tweety understood credibility instantly, since his own reputation followed him into every room, and that mutual recognition created an opening without formal conversation. Tweety Bird Locke introduced her to Ronnie Ron, the founder of Dangerous Records, who was already experimenting with street-connected artists rather than polished radio acts. Rajny Ron did not approach the studio as neutral ground, since he knew every session carried risk when active gang members entered confined spaces together. Rajny did not ask for permission to participate, instead making her interest clear through presence and insistence. She showed up consistently, listened more than she spoke, and waited until doubts softened under familiarity. The idea of forming inside Dangerous Records was risky even by early 90s standards, since it involved recording Bloods and Crips on the same compilation while street wars still burned outside. This was not framed as peace or reconciliation, but as business opportunity rooted in authenticity that mainstream rap could not manufacture. Rajny Ron saw dollar signs tied directly to danger, since controversy sold records while also threatening everyone involved. Participants understood that microphones did not erase rivalries, only delayed them temporarily. Bloody Mary did not enter the Bangin' on Wax project as a novelty addition meant to shock listeners with a female voice. Her inclusion made sense within the project's logic, since she represented lived experience equal to any man in the room. Doubts faded once people realized she did not posture, exaggerate, or dilute her background for acceptance. Her presence communicated seriousness, which reduced tension rather than escalating it. Studios became contested environments where body language mattered as much as lyrics, since rival sets occupied the same rooms under fragile agreements. Rajny Ron constantly reminded participants about money, deadlines, and exposure, reframing restraint as financial survival rather than moral choice. Bloody Mary adapted smoothly, understanding that discipline in that space protected future opportunities. Each session reinforced her standing, setting conditions for what followed once recording wrapped. By late 1992, tracks were taking shape quickly, fueled by urgency rather than refinement. Nobody involved believed longevity was guaranteed, which pushed productivity over perfection. That urgency built pressure ahead of release, as participants realized their voices would soon travel far beyond familiar blocks. The project moved forward, carrying expectations none fully understood yet. Recording sessions for Bangin' on Wax unfolded under constant psychological weight, since Bloods and Crips shared confined studio space while years of violence lingered unspoken. Weapons often remained nearby, not displayed openly, but understood as present, shaping behavior through implication alone. Rajny Ron enforced strict studio rules focused on productivity, reminding everyone that fighting inside jeopardized money waiting outside. That logic replaced impulse temporarily, though tension never disappeared fully. Participants positioned themselves carefully, staying alert to tone, gestures, and word choice, even while recording aggressive verses. The atmosphere resembled a ceasefire held together by mutual self-interest rather than trust. Bloody Mary navigated this space efficiently, keeping interactions minimal while delivering material confidently. Her composure reduced friction, allowing sessions to continue without interruption. When it came time to record Pyru Love, her approach reflected strategy rather than emotional release. She structured her verse as a roll call of blood territories across Los Angeles County, referencing places like Fruittown Pyru, Treetop Pyru, Athens Park, Denver Lane, and Crenshaw Mafia. Those names resonated immediately with street listeners who recognized geography as validation. The verse functioned as proof of reach, knowledge, and alignment rather than lyrical flourish. Listeners familiar with Los Angeles streets understood every substitution of letters, every coded phrase, and every directional reference. That familiarity turned the song into documentation rather than entertainment, amplifying its impact beyond music charts. Bloody Mary's delivery avoided theatrics, grounding authority in clarity and confidence. Her verse did not seek approval, since it assumed recognition. The project wrapped quickly, completed in roughly 2 weeks, reflecting urgency more than comfort. Once released in March 1993, Bangin' on Wax moved rapidly through underground channels before crossing into mainstream visibility. The album reached number 86 on the Billboard 200, eventually selling over 500,000 copies and earning gold certification. Success arrived unevenly, bringing attention without insulation. Money entered the picture unevenly as well, since Dangerous Records lacked infrastructure to manage sudden scale effectively. Artists received exposure faster than compensation, creating tension beneath surface celebration. Meanwhile, visibility transformed participants into recognizable figures beyond their neighborhoods. Voices became identifiers, turning anonymity into liability. Bloody Mary's name solidified permanently during this period, tied inseparably to the project's authenticity. That same authenticity placed targets on everyone involved, though consequences unfolded gradually rather than immediately. The album changed trajectories quietly, locking reputations in place while setting timelines nobody could predict. What began as a business gamble now carried weight far beyond the studio, with outcomes still unfolding long after release. Once Bangin' on Wax hit the streets in 1993, the celebration faded fast, replaced by a quieter awareness that visibility changed everything permanently. Voices once known only within certain blocks now traveled through the car stereos, swap meets, and prison tiers across Los Angeles County. That exposure did not create new beefs, yet it amplified existing ones that never cooled properly. People began connecting voices to faces, then faces to neighborhoods, which tightened the circle around everyone involved. The first losses arrived within a few years, reinforcing the idea that success did not erase street memory. Peanut 2, also known as KP from Denver Lane Bloods, was shot repeatedly in 1995, with reports stating he was hit 17 times during a gang-related attack. That level of violence sent a message louder than any diss record, reminding people how unresolved tensions reasserted themselves. His death circulated quietly at first, yet it settled heavily among those who shared studio space with him. Lil Laniak II, another Denver Lane affiliate, was killed not long after while sitting inside his vehicle with his infant daughter present during the shooting. The details spread fast through Compton and Inglewood, adding weight to the sense that participation carried consequences beyond personal risk. Stories like that did not require exaggeration, since facts alone unsettled anyone paying attention. Each incident tightened the narrative surrounding the project. B. Brazy, one of Bloody Mary's closest collaborators and a prominent Damu Redis member, remained active through the late 90s, moving carefully while continuing music. On May 9, 2003, he was shot and killed outside the Sandman Motel on Manchester Boulevard in Inglewood. Police reports confirmed multiple gunshot wounds, though the case remained unsolved despite public reward offers. His death hit harder than earlier losses, since his presence lingered longer and his association with Mary felt inseparable. Other names followed in uneven intervals, creating a pattern without rhythm. Tiptoe and Spider, both affiliated with Crenshaw Mafia Bloods, were killed in separate incidents during the late 90s. OG Mad Eye, another Crenshaw Mafia figure tied to the same recording circle, also lost his life to gun violence. Each loss arrived without ceremony, folding into a growing ledger that people referenced quietly rather than publicly. On the Crip side, the fallout looked similar, though circumstances varied. Faux Clips Eclipse, the Kelly Park Crip who performed hooks on Bangin' on Wax, was shot and killed in Compton in 1998. A WOL, another Kelly Park affiliate involved with the project, died during a shootout with law enforcement in 1997. Prison replaced death for others, such as Lil Hawk, who received a life sentence following a murder conviction in 1998. What made these losses heavier was their spread across years, preventing closure or distance. Funerals blurred together, attended by fewer people each time due to fear and fatigue. Survivors adjusted routines, limited exposure, and avoided unnecessary visibility whenever possible. Bloody Mary followed that path closely, reducing appearances while maintaining respect through consistency rather than confrontation. Her survival during this period did not come from isolation, but from calculated presence. She stayed connected without broadcasting movements, relying on relationships built earlier rather than expanding circles recklessly. People noticed her restraint, reading it as maturity instead of fear. That interpretation preserved her standing while others disappeared. By the early 2000s, talk around the project shifted from coincidence toward cautionary legend. Younger artists heard the stories secondhand, learning that participation carried weight extending past music. The phrase that everyone who rapped beside her ended up dead gained traction, not through superstition, but accumulation. That belief settled quietly into street memory, shaping how her name was spoken afterward. While losses mounted around her, Bloody Mary's move to Death Row Records represented a calculated step rather than escape from familiar structures. Suge Knight took interest after Recognize that aligned naturally with the label's blood-affiliated environment. Death Row did not separate street identity from business, blending both openly through personnel, security, and culture. That overlap made the transition feel familiar rather than foreign. Suge Knight did not mentor her creatively, instead offering access and recognition tied to credibility she already possessed. She recorded material during 1995 and 1996, working alongside artists connected to the label's inner circle. Tracks like Untouchable placed her beside the Lady of Rage and Storm, reinforcing her ability to stand firm among established names. Sessions moved forward with momentum, hinting at a full-length album that never materialized publicly. The promise surrounding her Death Row work stalled abruptly following Tupac Shakur's murder in September 1996. Suge Knight's subsequent incarceration disrupted operations, freezing projects midstream without formal resolution. Master recordings remained locked away, inaccessible while the label unraveled internally. Bloody Mary found herself caught between opportunity and stagnation without leverage to force release. Frustration grew around contracts, royalties, and control, echoing earlier disputes with dangerous records. She recognized patterns forming again, where visibility did not guarantee ownership or clarity. Rather than fight publicly, she stepped back, reassessing involvement without burning bridges. That choice reflected experience gained through earlier industry lessons. Leaving Death Row did not diminish her respect, since her reputation existed independently of label affiliation. She continued working sporadically, collaborating with producers like DJ King Assassin while maintaining autonomy. Compilation releases later surfaced unreleased tracks, offering glimpses into what remained shelved. Those releases reminded listeners of her presence without reopening past risks. By the early 2000s, Bloody Mary occupied a different position. Neither rising star nor forgotten name, she moved carefully, balancing independence with recognition earned earlier. People still spoke her name with familiarity, though appearances became rarer. That balance defined her final years in music, marked by caution rather than retreat. Her story during this phase reflected adaptation rather than defeat. She understood the industry's limits without romanticizing struggle. Experience replaced urgency, shaping decisions quietly. Respect remained intact, carried forward through memory instead of constant output. By the early 2000s, Bloody Mary existed in a space few from her era ever reached, since longevity itself reshaped how people spoke her name across Compton, Inglewood, and surrounding neighborhoods. She was no longer discussed as an active participant chasing relevance or territory, but as a reference point used to measure seriousness, discipline, and restraint. Younger bloods heard her name attached to stories rather than sightings, which gave her reputation a different texture rooted in survival rather than spectacle. That shift mattered since absence often signals strength in environments where visibility attracts unnecessary attention. Motherhood became part of her daily reality during these later years, grounding her movements and narrowing priorities without softening her standing. She had 2 children, a daughter named Larai and a son named David, and raising them required structure incompatible with reckless exposure. People around her noticed that balance, interpreting it as growth rather than retreat. She managed to maintain respect without constant presence, which reinforced the idea that credibility did not require constant demonstration. Her reduced public profile did not erase street acknowledgement, since relationships built earlier remained intact. She still moved through familiar areas with recognition, though appearances became deliberate rather than casual. That control over movement mattered, allowing her to avoid unnecessary conflicts tied to newer beefs she had no interest in inheriting. Younger members observed that pattern closely, learning that restraint could carry more weight than constant assertion. Stories circulated about her riding motorcycles through various neighborhoods, sometimes through rival areas without provoking challenges. Whether exaggerated or accurate, such stories reinforced the perception that her reputation traveled ahead of her. Fear attached to consistency, not noise, shaping how people calculated interactions. That reputation functioned as insulation, reducing the likelihood of confrontations escalating unexpectedly. Musically, she resurfaced occasionally through compilations like Day of Resurrection, released in 2003 by Ronnie Ron, which included older recordings and unreleased Death Row material. Those tracks reminded listeners of her voice without pulling her back into constant production cycles. Collaborations like Bitch Get Lifted with B. Brazy carried heavier meaning after his death, connecting her voice to losses already absorbed by the streets. Music became archival rather than aspirational, preserving presence without demanding participation. Younger artists referenced her selectively, often as cautionary proof rather than inspiration for imitation. Her story circulated in conversations warning about the costs tied to authenticity during the 90s gangsta rap era. She represented someone who navigated storms without being consumed immediately, which mattered to those studying patterns rather than chasing glory. That role carried influence quietly, shaping perceptions without formal acknowledgement. By this stage, Bloody Mary's name carried layered meaning, blending survival, discipline, and history into a single reference. People did not expect new moves or public returns, which reduced pressure and speculation. She lived within boundaries she set deliberately, balancing family, memory, and recognition. That balance defined her later years, leading toward an ending that arrived without warning rather than buildup. On November 18, 2006, Bloody Mary spent her day focused on ordinary movement rather than street business or music obligations. She rode her motorcycle through Compton, heading toward a Harley-Davidson-related event, a routine ride that carried no symbolic weight at the time. Traffic moved normally around Wilmington Avenue and Rosecrans Boulevard, with nothing suggesting interruption ahead. That normalcy mattered, since the events that followed had no connection to her past conflicts. At the same time, a separate police pursuit unfolded nearby involving a black Cadillac Escalade fleeing law enforcement at high speed. The driver, attempting to evade capture, ignored traffic signals and surrounding vehicles. That decision placed unrelated lives at risk without warning or intention. The chase converged, with Bloody Mary's path purely through timing. The Escalade entered the intersection recklessly, colliding with her motorcycle with enough force to throw her body violently onto the pavement. Emergency responders arrived quickly, assessing injuries that were immediately life-threatening. She was transported to the hospital in critical condition, suffering crushed lungs, shattered hips, and severe head trauma. Doctors stabilized her physically, while neurological assessments revealed minimal brain activity. She remained on life support for 3 days, during which medical staff monitored swelling and organ response without signs of recovery. Family members gathered quietly, processing information delivered clinically rather than emotionally. There were no press conferences or public statements, only updates shared within close circles. Hope existed briefly, though outcomes became clearer with each passing hour. On November 21, 2006, doctors confirmed the absence of meaningful brain function, leaving no medical path forward. Her family made the decision to remove life support, and she was pronounced dead later that day at age 36. The driver responsible for the collision fled the scene, avoiding immediate accountability, which added frustration without altering the outcome. Authorities classified the incident as a tragic consequence of reckless flight rather than targeted violence. News traveled through Compton steadily rather than explosively, producing quiet disbelief instead of retaliation. People struggled to reconcile how someone who navigated decades of conflict died through random circumstance. Conversations reflected confusion more than anger, since no set stood responsible. That absence of blame shifted reactions inward rather than outward. Online forums, local conversations, and industry circles acknowledged her death without sensationalism. Many noted the irony privately, recognizing how unrelated chaos claimed someone shaped by structured conflict. Her mother traveled from Ohio to claim her body, bringing her home to Steubenville for burial. That return closed a geographical loop few had considered before. Her death settled into the broader pattern surrounding her story, marked by loss without clear resolution. Streets did not erupt and music did not pause, yet acknowledgement lingered quietly. People spoke her name carefully, aware that survival never guaranteed permanence. That ending reinforced lessons already understood, completing her story without spectacle. After her death settled into public memory, Bloody Mary's name did not explode into mainstream tributes or posthumous branding campaigns, since her influence lived mostly in recall rather than replay. West Coast history placed her differently, treating her as a reference point instead of a celebrated figure pushed through documentaries or award stages. People who spoke about her did so casually, folding her name into conversations about eras, losses, and survival rather than achievements alone. That placement reflected how her presence mattered more inside lived environments than commercial platforms ever captured. The rumor framing this story, that everyone who rapped with her ended up dead, lingered without formal confirmation or denial. When examined closely, proximity explained much of that belief, since those involved operated within overlapping territories during a period when violence escalated naturally. Timing mattered as well, since Banging on Wax arrived at a moment when exposure increased risk faster than protection. Environment completed the equation, placing participants inside systems that punished visibility regardless of talent or intention. No superstition needed reinforcing, since accumulation created perception organically. Losses stretched across years, arriving unevenly, which prevented dismissal as coincidence. People connected outcomes through memory rather than analysis, allowing the narrative to grow quietly. That growth shaped how her name circulated afterward, attached to caution rather than fear. Her legacy offered instruction without lectures, showing how survival depended on navigation instead of bravado. She demonstrated that restraint could preserve standing while reducing exposure, especially after attention peaked. Gender played a role here, not as immunity but as differentiation, since expectations shaped interactions differently. She moved through those expectations deliberately, neither exploiting nor rejecting them outright. In West Coast conversations, Bloody Mary often appears alongside discussions of authenticity during the 90s, referenced when separating lived experience from performance. She represented a moment when reality entered the booth without disguise. That representation carried cost, though it also produced clarity. Younger listeners learned lessons indirectly through her story, absorbing outcomes rather than directives. Her absence left space rather than vacuum, since she did not anchor movements or organizations requiring succession. Music continued, streets shifted, and new names replaced old ones. Still, her story remained intact, preserved through recollection instead of repetition. That preservation mattered more than chart placement. Returning to the opening image, the motorcycle, the hospital room, and the quiet disbelief align differently now. Those details no longer feel disconnected from context, fitting instead into a longer sequence shaped by place, timing, and choices. Her ending did not contradict her life, even if it surprised those who knew her history. The noise faded, leaving understanding rather than mystery behind.